We'd love to. Oh, thank you, Olivia. Olivia just started the recording. I'll go ahead and repeat this during the introduction, but this webinar is being recorded, except for a caveat that I will explain in the introduction. All right, I see we have a lot of people coming in. Again, if you just want to drop in the chat where you're joining us from, we'd love to see where everybody's coming from today. I'll go ahead and type mine in there too. Oh, we have Mike D from Seattle. We have Heidi from Fresno, California. And I am joining from Washington, D.C., but I am originally from Las Vegas. Let's see, who else do we have? We have Laura coming from Eugene, Oregon. Camacha from Houston. We have the Elizabeth Coalition from New Jersey. Paula is joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. Hal Rose from Brooklyn, New York. Sherry is joining us from Texas. Mary Brown from Madison, Wisconsin. We have Me Too, a colleague from NLIHC, joining us from Illinois. Gloria Hill from Inglewood, California. Oh, Crystal, Las Vegas, Nevada. That's where I was born and raised. Oh, and we have somebody else from Las Vegas as well, Israel Artiga. And we have Talisa from Jersey City, New Jersey. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced this name, but we have Walisa from Atlanta, from Southern Center for Human Rights. And then we have Elmia from Middlesex County, New Jersey. We have Liliana from California. Tony from Richmond, Virginia, via NLC. And then we have Runa from Memphis, Texas. Yanine joining us from Providence, Rhode Island. Katya from Portland, Oregon. We have Susan from Los Angeles. And then we have my colleague Olivia joining us from NLIHC. She's in DC, but originally from Houston, Texas. We have Charles joining us from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And then we have Juan Pablo from Dallas, Texas. Jordan from Houston, Texas. Lots of Texas love today. We have Jamie joining us from Memphis, Tennessee. Tony Wilson from Georgia. We have Dr. Bambi Hayes Brown from Georgia ACT, who's also an NLIHC board member, joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. We have Marie from Yonkers, New York. Chris O'Hara from Chicago. And the Cook County COCs. Great. And then Olivia mentioning that she loves all the Texans in here. Lots of Texas love. Great. All right, well, feel free to keep dropping them in the chat, friends. We'll go ahead and get started. I see that we have a lot of folks in here. But feel free to continue dropping where you're joining us from in the chat. So hello, everyone. I know this is probably the third time you've seen a new face, but my name is Sydney Betancourt, and I'm the housing advocacy organizer who will be permanently kind of taking over Tenant Talk Live, so you'll be seeing me more often. And I'm also joined today by Olivia Arena, who's also another housing advocacy organizer. She will be helping out with the questions and the chat as well, and dropping links. Olivia, if you want to say hi.
Hey, I'll be helping out. If you have questions, feel free to put them in Q&A, and I'll be adding links to the chat.
Great. So I just want to let you all know that we will be recording this call. There will be a part towards the end of the call that we will stop recording, and I'll explain that in a little bit. And then we will be sharing all of the notes and all the links and everything with you all in a follow-up email afterwards. So don't worry about, if you want to take notes, feel free to, but you don't have to. We'll be including everything, including this recording in that email. And then today our topic will be on the fair housing guidance for tenants with a conviction history. And this was a topic chosen by you all. We did a survey last time and we also shared it in our Facebook group, where we'll be exploring that intersection between housing and the justice system. Fun fact, we also did a Tenant Talk publication on this topic. Olivia, if you can share the chat of that link in the chat, please. It was called The Path to Housing During Reentry. And we want to continue this discussion with you that we had in this publication. And in addition to this topic, kind of noticing the importance of the eviction moratorium ending this past weekend, we also wanted to provide a space for all of you to ask questions about this, but to also share your stories. So towards the end of the event, around 6:45, we will stop recording the event, and we're going to go ahead and allow some of you all, if you need like a safe space to kind of talk about your stories dealing with eviction, we want to provide that for you. And even though it'll stop being recorded, I just want you all to be aware that this is like a public webinar. So the people who are on this webinar will still be able to hear what you have to say. So just be aware of that if you are going to be sharing your stories with us. And so with that being said, we're also going to be extending the length of this webinar today, and it'll go to about 7:15 if you would like to stay in order to hear people out to share their stories. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the agenda, just because we altered it a little bit in order to make time for y'all to share your stories. Instead of starting out with the panelists, we're going to start with updates from NLIHC's staff, including policy updates and updates on the rental assistant disbursement, which you all highlighted in the survey that we took last time. A lot of y'all wanted updates and had questions about those areas, so we're going to go ahead and have them provide those updates. And then we'll have our panelists present, and you can do a Q&A with them. And then following that portion, again, like I said earlier, I'll stop recording and we can go ahead and go into questions or stories or whatever you would like that space to look like. And then just like a few reminders for you all before I have our NLIHC staff friends join us. Feel free to follow our Facebook group. We do post a lot of updates on there. Olivia will post the link to that shortly in the chat. But it's a great way for you to stay connected to the folks that are attending these meetings. And then you can also share any posts that you feel are relevant to Tenant Talk. And then just a reminder to please use the chat feature to, just post any comments, and Olivia will be sharing links. You all can feel free to share links as well. And then if you have any questions, just make sure to drop those in the Q&A box. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and bring on our NLIHC staff. So we will be having research analyst Emma Foley join us today to give an update on rental assistant disbursement and any questions you may have. And then following her, we'll be joined by Kim Johnson, a policy analyst with NLIHC, to talk about any policy updates. And we'll go ahead and begin with Emma.
Great, thanks, Sydney. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, do you all see the presentation without the notes in view mode? Okay, cool, thanks, Olivia. So like Sydney said, I'll be talking about dispersal of emergency rental assistance funds, as well as just wanted to highlight a few resources for you all that NLIHC has been putting together over the past year or so to both kind of locate emergency rental assistance programs and to help inform emergency rental assistance programs in your area. And we just want to revisit these particularly as the end of since the eviction moratorium has expired. And so I have a couple kind of data heavy slides, which I apologize for, but I know that they'll send them out after the end of this webinar. And so first, I just wanted to start off with an update on ERA spending progress overall. And so ERA spending has been ramping up from when it started in January. It seems to be doubling each time that the Department of Treasury reports out on spending. However, it's certainly not fast enough because the federal eviction moratorium has expired, and obviously many people are at risk of eviction. So NLIHT has compiled this data from a few different data sources, the Department of Treasury, some emergency rental assistance dashboards, news articles, and communications with partners to track overall ERA spending. We update this regularly, and right now we're tracking that approximately $3.6 billion in funding has been approved or distributed to renter households, but this is out of a total of 24.6 billion that we're tracking. And so it's not a direct division equation. There's a little note about how we calculate the percent, but we estimate that this is approximately only 16.3% of funds that have been dispersed of the $25 billion allocation. Some other things we're noticing is that states are spending down funding a lot slower than localities, which is concerning because they have the bulk of the funding. They have about 18 billion of the 25. And then I wanted to go ahead and share this slide as well, which has a snapshot of how state level programs are doing. So they're just in alphabetical order in columns, and each has a percentage of how much funding has been distributed in each state. But again, this is only for the programs that are operating on the state level. So it might be very different depending on, if you're in a city or county that has an emergency rental assistance program. And so one thing that you might know is that the numbers are vastly different. So some state programs have been able to spin down relatively quickly. So Texas, for example, is around 55%, and Virginia is around 47%. But other states, particularly some large states with large renter populations, have spent very little. So you'll see South Carolina and New York both have spent 0%, and Florida has only spent about 3%. And so this will be sent out as well. And if you have any questions, please do let me know. A lot of states have dashboards of how their program is doing. And so I can share a link to some of those in the chat if you're interested in your own state. And then next, I just wanted to highlight a few resources that we have, and we can drop these links in the chat as well. The first is an emergency rental assistance program locator, which helps people find emergency rental assistance programs near them. And if you're active in your in a tenant organizing group or public housing community, then spreading the word about where these programs are available would be super helpful. Recent research has shown that a huge percentage of renters still don't know that this assistance is available, and so getting the word out is really of the utmost importance. And the database works. You can just search your state or your city or your county, and it will come up with anything that matches your search. So you could scroll through the whole list, which is pretty long, almost 500 programs, or you can just type in and that will appear. We also have a dashboard that tracks different best practices, things like self-attestation or allowing direct-to-tenant assistance when a landlord refuses. And sometime in the next week or so, this will also include kind of like a spending thermometer of how fast the ERA funding is getting out. So it'll be providing real-time updates, and we can be sure to update you all once that is live as well. The dashboard also has a feature where you can click on different things like programs allowing self-attestation or allowing direct-to-tenant assistance or serving tenants with federal rent subsidies, and it will show you all of the programs that meet those criteria. And then lastly, we just have a resource hub, which has a number of different categories. This is just one showing up right now. And then it has examples from emergency rental assistance programs across the country. So say you notice that the program serving your city isn't offering direct-to-tenant assistance, you can go to the direct-to-tenant section of the webpage and find examples and potentially use those to help influence emergency rental assistance programs near you. And I think that's all that I have for today, but happy to answer any questions, and thanks so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Emma. We have one question that did come in. It says, is there a reason states are spending slower because there are some restrictions on their spending?
I think that it's, they got such huge allocations, which I think is part of it. You know, their allocations were so much bigger than cities and counties. And so I think it took some of them a while to kind of build the infrastructure and staffing that they needed to work out the kinks. And so programs that, you know, states like Florida and New York opened relatively recently. And so it's been a trend we've seen that, you know, once a program is open for a few months, it might kind of get its sea legs, work out some of the challenges that it's facing, and then start spending more quickly. But for programs that just opened in, you know, June, that just might not have happened yet.
Great, thank you so much. I think that was the only question we got. Okay, we just got one more. Is there any way to see the guidance from the Treasury to states?
Yeah, definitely. I can post a link right after this into the chat.
Cool. Sounds great. Thank you so much, Emma.
Thanks.
And then we're going to have Kim Johnson join us now to provide a policy update really quickly.
Great, thanks, Sydney. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Johnson, a policy analyst with NLIHC. I wish I was coming to you all with better news, but unfortunately, that is not the vibe for today. So in a devastating failure to act in a moment of crisis, Congress, the White House, and the Supreme Court allowed the eviction moratorium to expire on July 31st. Despite the growing danger from the Delta variant and the fact that 6.5 million renter households are still behind on their rent. So I'm going to lay out a brief timeline of kind of what's happened and where things are now, and then just give a really quick update on the reconciliation bill and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act before turning it back over to Sydney. So on July 29th, the White House stated that the CDC could not extend the moratorium after the Supreme Court issued an opinion stating that the CDC likely overextended its authority in issuing the moratorium, and any additional extension would need to come from Congress. The White House passed responsibility for extending the federal eviction moratorium to Congress about 48 hours before it was set to expire. And then on the evening of July 30th, Congresswoman Maxine Waters introduced a bill to extend the moratorium, but House Democrats could not get enough votes to pass the measure. The bill was ultimately defeated in the House before House members left town for summer recess. Congresswoman Cori Bush has been camped outside of the Capitol for 3 days in protest of the moratorium's expiration and to push her colleagues to return to session and get the bill passed. Before the House vote, she also penned a powerful letter to her colleagues in which she discussed her own experience with eviction and homelessness and urged her colleagues to vote in favor of the bill. I am going to post a link to that letter in case folks are interested in reading it. So that's what that Google Drive document is. So with both the White House and Congress unable or unwilling to extend it, the federal eviction moratorium expired on July 31st. After intense pressure from advocates, renters at risk of evictions, and members of Congress like Representative Bush, the Biden administration released a statement today raising the prospect of a new 30-day eviction moratorium focused on counties with high rates of COVID-19. The statement also noted the administration is looking for other legal avenues to reinstate the moratorium. So NLIHC is going to keep pressing the Biden administration and Congress to enact vital protections and keep working with our partners at the state and local level to take immediate action to keep renters safe. If the administration cannot or will not extend the full moratorium, then they should immediately implement an eviction moratorium for renters living in all federally assisted properties and properties with federally backed mortgages. The Department of Justice should direct courts to stop evictions for renters who are applying for emergency rental assistance. And the Treasury Department should eliminate barriers that continue to prevent emergency rental assistance programs from serving households. The CDC should also require landlords to provide 30 days notice to renters before beginning eviction actions. State and local leaders can also implement their own eviction moratoriums and enact renter protections like right to counsel, expungement of eviction records, and just cause eviction protections to help renters now and in the long term. So like I said at the top, I don't want to take up a ton of time with additional updates. So I'll just say quickly that the Senate is set to take up the bipartisan infrastructure bill this week. The measure is expected to pass the Senate, and when it does, senators will turn their attention to the $3.5 trillion reconciliation package that they can enact without Republican support. The House is on recess, but may return next week to take up the reconciliation package once it's out of the Senate. And if they do, they will face intense pressure to vote again on the moratorium legislation while they're in session. And so while we continue the work of getting the moratorium reinstated, renters in need of assistance should call 211 or visit 211.org, which will connect you to a local call center that can help share information about local programs that might be able to help you. You can also call your local rental assistance program using NLIHC's database that Emma linked to earlier. More than 1,000 emergency rental assistance programs have been created in response to the pandemic, and Congress has provided $46 billion to help renters remain stably housed. You can also contact a legal aid attorney for legal advice to see what state or local policies might offer additional protections. And keep calling your members of Congress. District office staff often know how to connect you to available state or local resources. And it's important to keep the heat on Congress to take action. So I'm happy to try to answer any questions. Unfortunately, I don't know that I'll have a lot of answers right now, but in the interest of time, I'll wrap it up and hand it back over to you, Sydney.
Thank you, Kim. We did have some questions come in, the first one of which is the government able to stop the evictions while waiting on funds?
So state and local governments can impose their own eviction moratoriums, which we are encouraging them to do in order to keep renters safe. Unfortunately, the federal government has, because that eviction moratorium expired, the one from the CDC, that one is no longer offering tenants that kind of blanket protection that it once did. So state and local governments and some state and local governments have implemented their own moratoriums. They can take that action while ERA is being distributed.
Great, thank you. And then we had a question from Talisa that was actually answered by Emma in the chat, but I'm just going to read it out for folks on the phone. If one program is only paying back rent, can a tenant go to another program to help going forward? And then Emma, Emma responded, oh, if you want to go ahead and say it out loud, I'm sorry, Emma, I couldn't find it in the chat.
So it's kind of complicated and can depend just because, for example, some states cover everyone in a state and people also have city and county programs, but some states only cover people not covered by city and county programs. So some people might have a few options of where to apply, whereas some people might only have one. We're always happy to look into that as well. We know it can get a bit confusing.
Thank you. And then we had somebody comment in the chat, over 3,000 evictions have been filed in Columbus, Georgia, and landlords were just waiting for the 31st to pass, which is something that we've been hearing often too. The next question that came up in the chat, is there access to mediation links for eviction that NLIHC can share?
Oh, good question. I'm sure that we do have some links, and I see that Olivia just put some links to take you to legal aid attorneys in the chat, but I will do some searching right quick and see if we can find anything about mediation.
Great, thank you so much. And then we have some Georgians networking in the chat, sharing their emails. We have somebody else commenting that the 3,000 evictions in a town of only 200K, which is a lot. It is a dire situation, as was stated in the comments. Let's see, I think those were the only questions for now. Oh, Mike D asks, is there a link to the protest at the Capitol with people camping out? Olivia and I were looking into this before the event, but it seems that it's no longer going unless somebody else has heard or seen different. I think they've stopped protesting at the Capitol.
And I will just note there's a question from Tony Wilson in the chat asking if landlords can accept ERA funds and still file for an eviction of a tenant. Unfortunately, we keep seeing that happen where they'll accept ERA and then file for an eviction anyway, sometimes for things other than non-payment of rent under kind of the guise of, oh, well, they were, you know, a bad tenant anyway. And so we're going to keep filing for an eviction. Some programs have outright banned landlords from doing that and said, you know, if you're taking this money, a condition of taking this money is not evicting your tenant. But unfortunately, we do see instances where landlords accept that funding and then choose to move forward with an eviction anyway. Yeah, so it can really vary from place to place, like Emma was saying. There's not a whole lot of consistency in how these programs have been implemented and the specific policies surrounding tenant protections within them.
Okay, thank you, Kim. I believe that was the last question, so we'll go ahead and move to the part in our webinar where we talk with our panelists today. And so we'll be joined today by Jacqueline Altamirano-Marin from the Vera Institute of Justice, and she is an Opening Doors to Public Housing associate. We'll also be joined by Laura Johnson from Sponsors Incorporated in Oregon, and she's the Director of Program Development. And lastly, we'll have Maria Moon, who is a housing justice organizer at the Chicago Fair Housing Alliance. And to get us started, we'll have Jacqueline begin with her presentation.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for that introduction. And thank you to the folks joining us. So my name's Jacqueline and I use she and her pronouns. And I'm actually calling from Portland, Oregon today, but I'm normally based in the Bronx and I work out of Vera's New York office. So nice to see all the Oregon people on the call. But I am a program associate with the Vera Institute, specifically the Opening Doors program. And just as a little bit of background with the Vera Institute, we actually work in government, in partnership with government and civic leaders to improve justice systems. And we actually have active projects in over 40 states. So we have a very, our reach is really from coast to coast. And the work that I do is actually with the Opening Doors to Public Housing Initiative. And just as a brief synopsis of what we do through that program is actually we work with select public housing authorities. I'll refer to them as PHAs throughout the presentation, but we work with public housing authorities across the country that are looking to change their admissions policies and or implement reentry programs to increase access to public housing for folks with justice involvement. And we do this work in partnership with other folks from the community. So we actually work with people in reentry, we work with law enforcement agencies, county and state corrections departments, and of course, advocates that are wanting to see these changes enacted to meet the needs of those community members. And through our TA, we've actually developed several policy recommendations that we urge PHAs to adopt. PHAs have so much discretion. And so what we do is work within that discretion to really see them remove some barriers to public housing for folks with justice involvement. And all of our policy recommendations are research-backed, they're innovative strategies that we've seen other PHAs take on and sort of champion. So a lot of what we do is also peer-to-peer learning or sharing of information of best strategies and best practices. And for example, some of the policy recommendations that we might make is for PHAs to scale back look-back periods. And so this is the amount of time that a housing authority can look back into someone's criminal record and what they can take into consideration. We actually also urge people to not look at arrests, for example, when looking at somebody's criminal record, and to not look at things like misdemeanors, because we know that those are not indicative of someone's ability to be a successful tenant. So those are the type of recommendations that we make. And we also do, like I said, we like to champion some of the efforts of other public housing authorities. Illinois actually just passed a really incredible first of its kind bill that I urge everybody to check out. It has some of the most progressive mandates that we've seen. They have a 6-month look back period that is by far the most progressive of any state bill. There's other housing authorities that have completely removed the use of criminal background check as part of their admissions, but on a state level, we've not seen anything like that. So that's sort of the information that we also like to bring into these spaces. And for today, I know that a lot of folks are really thinking about the millions of people that are going to be affected by the ending of the eviction moratorium. So I'd also like to highlight that some of the recommendations are also not just getting people into admission into housing by making PHAs aware of the barriers in their admissions process, but also making them aware that past evictions do not determine someone's ability to be a successful tenant. So one of our key recommendations is that we say an applicant's having an eviction on their record is not indicative of engaging criminal behavior. It's not indicative of that person's ability to be a successful tenant in public housing. And even HUD has stressed the importance of PHAs carefully reviewing the details behind evictions. So we stress, and so does HUD, that factors that should be evaluated include the family's income and composition at the time of the eviction, the grounds of the eviction, and then also just considering the excessive rent burden in the private rental market for people. And with all of that, I want to stick to the time frame, but I do want to leave folks with a few action items of what you all can do with working with public housing. So the first one is that there are actually several organizations that can help people navigate the process of applying for public housing. So unfortunately, I wish I could tell you that everybody's admissions policies are going to look like it a certain way, but there's 3,300 PHAs nationwide, and each of them can have a different admissions policy. And they vary from city to city and city to county. So it's really necessary to get some help being able to navigate what their admissions policy is. The second thing is that folks have a right to appeal a denial, and you can actually have legal representation. You can have representation from an advocate or an organization, a family member. And so some people think, although it's an additional barrier, and I wish more and more housing authorities would actually not have people jump through that hoop, that you do have the ability to go ahead and appeal and present mitigating circumstances or evidence of rehabilitation that show a more holistic sense of who you are now, and also the conviction that folks are considering. And then the third is to really advocate to your local public housing authority of the barriers that currently exist through their admissions policies. I'm happy to share the policy recommendations that we use, but really in the states that we work with, in Louisiana, in New York, in Pittsburgh, we've seen that the advocates that are working with us really have the most sway and really are influential in making people aware and holding people accountable of what the needs of residents are in those specific communities. So I would definitely urge folks to check that out and then get involved in those conversations. I'm happy to elaborate on everything else or anything that folks have questions on, but I think for now, that's what I'll share with folks.
Great. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. We did have a few questions come in. The first one might be for NLIHC staff, but feel free to answer it if you know the answer. It says the eviction and moratoria could be reinstated city by city or town by town, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Very short and to the point. Okay, so the next question that we had, let me just scroll down to find it really fast. It was to all of you, but Jacqueline, if you want to go ahead and answer. It says from Linda, I just heard this afternoon that 3 years after a felony is over, 3 years off paper, that asking, is a felony like a disability?
Interesting. Okay, so I think I know, but please, if there's more, if I can get more clarity. For us, there is data that says that after that after 5 years, a felony no longer has an impact. The amount of impact that a conviction actually has is very, very low, but the standard sort of research back answer that I will say is that we tell folks that the data shows that after 2 years, a misdemeanor has no effect on somebody's tenancy. After 5 years, a felony has no effect on somebody's tenancy. So our usual recommendation is after 2 years of a misdemeanor, that people not look back any further than 5 years. And that's just through that data back lens. But of course, people are able to talk about, housing authorities have eliminated totally the use of looking back at somebody's criminal background or using that as a criteria for admissions. But that is sort of like what the data says and what some people have used for their look back. I hope that answered some of the question.
Can I add something to that? In addition to, I'm wondering if the piece is also around whether it's illegal to ask the question. And in some jurisdictions, there are some restrictions on what, kind of like a ban the box for housing. And in some jurisdictions, there are some restrictions on what a landlord or property manager can ask with regard to conviction history or what they consider. But that's very locally defined. So yeah.
Great, thank you so much both. We did have a question come in again, and I think Kim answered it below, but I'll just go ahead and read it out for folks who are on the phone. It says, housing policy is not my usual space, so can someone tell me why a filed eviction can't trigger the rental assistant process? And it's not too much to ask, Tony. It's definitely not. We're all here to learn. But Kim said that some localities actually linked eviction filings to ERA. Advocates reach out to tenants after an eviction has been filed to help them obtain rental assistance. Unfortunately, localities linking the two are few and far between, and ideally the ERA would reach tenants before an eviction is filed, so there's nothing on a tenant's record. And I think that was the last question that we had. We did have some comments come through the chat, but for the sake of time right now, I'll go ahead and move forward with our next speaker, who is Laura Johnson from Sponsors Incorporated. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and give a presentation.
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. My name is Laura Johnson. Again, I'm Director of Program Development at an organization called Sponsors. We're based in Eugene, Oregon, and we provide reentry services. We've been around since 1973, and I think we're best known for our housing programs. We largely serve folks who are releasing from state prison directly to homelessness. And we prioritize our services for people who are at greatest risk to become re-involved with the system without additional supports. In addition to that transitional housing program, we provide all kinds of wraparound services, behavioral health, employment support, et cetera, as well as a long-term housing program and a permanent supportive housing program. We serve about 700 people a year in our housing programs and more than 1,500 a year in our broader wraparound services. And I think one of the things that is very unique about our program, well, first that it exists because most places don't have this kind of a robust reentry program, but also that we have a very progressive public housing authority here in Lane County, and they actually have created a local preference for people that we refer to them who have a conviction history for Section 8 vouchers and also for public housing. And so just to tell you sort of the opposite extreme of what can happen is that in certain circumstances, if you're able to effectively advocate and partner and demonstrate that this population is deserving of preference, is deserving of access, and that question of deservedness is a difficult one to answer depending on who you're working with, but that it is possible not just to break down the barriers, but even to provide additional support. The only things that only convictions that our housing authority restricts on are if you're a lifetime federal sex offender, which is required to, if you're required to register for your entire life, and if you've been convicted of manufacturing methamphetamines in funded housing. And that's because HUD nationally requires that. Otherwise, anyone can access here in Lane County. It doesn't mean they actually get it, but they're not necessarily, they're still eligible. Through our partnership with that program, we've demonstrated a 94% success rate of placing 135 people who are homeless, releasing from the Department of Corrections, in terms of they're not becoming re-involved in the system and not becoming homeless. Again, they've maintained ongoing housing stability, which is a huge benchmark and something that I hope we can use to advocate with other PHAs nationwide. I think one of the things that I would offer, in addition to what Jacqueline already touched on, is when you're presenting yourself to a local landlord or property manager, I think it's really important to try to control the story. Tell your own story before the criminal background check tells the story for you. Get in front of that and put together a housing packet that best represents why you would be a good tenant. And maybe that is a letter of explanation that calls attention to your past conviction history and demonstrates the way that you have committed to doing life differently moving forward. And anything supporting that you can put into that, maybe you've passed a class or gained sort of a certification, you've paid your rent on time, you've maintained employment, whatever you can do to help. And this shouldn't be necessary, right? But in this current situation, it unfortunately is. And so the best way that you can make your case for yourself, letters of support from people, perhaps a sponsor or an employer or a service provider who knows you and can provide some supportive guidance and assurance to a potential landlord. And then in many circumstances, even with what we would call second chance landlords who regularly rent to people who have conviction histories, sometimes their protocols require that they must deny an application. And in those circumstances, I really want to emphasize the importance of not giving up. Jacqueline talked about the request for reasonable accommodation, and I know it was talked about in the chat. And what I have learned is that most of the people who come through our program do experience some sort of a disability. It may not be a visible disability. It may not be a disability that would allow them to access like Social Security benefits, for example. But if your conviction history stems from a previously untreated disability, say substance use disorder, you can ask for a request for reasonable accommodation based on a previously untreated disability that was directly led to your crime of conviction. You don't have to say what the disability is. There's a lot that you actually don't have to disclose because of HIPAA and fair housing laws. And that's protected health information of disability status. You can request that they overlook your conviction history as a result of this disability. They are by law required to consider that request. We have had pretty good success with people who have even some of the most extraordinary felony conviction histories be able to access housing utilizing the request for reasonable accommodation process. It takes some savitude, but program service providers, I highly encourage you to look into being able to support people doing that. And anyone can do it. You don't need a supportive guide to do it. There's a pretty great resource that's called Moving Forward with the Past, and I can see if I can put it in the chat. It's created by the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. So some of it may be Oregon specific, but it actually includes templates for requesting your own reasonable accommodation, for writing a letter of explanation, and has some very helpful how-to guides. So be very happy to share that with anyone, and also to answer any questions that folks may have. I'll quickly say something about eviction. There's very much a state-by-state situation, as with the rental assistance funds and the eviction moratoria. Some states have access to eviction expungement in the same way that you would have potential access to expunge your criminal record, and it completely depends on a state-by-state basis. I would encourage you to find out what is potentially available to you in your state. The legislation is changing so rapidly that we even have legal aid attorneys who are literally printing out the guidance and providing it to the judge, because the judges can't track how fast things are changing. So if you can look into that for yourselves, you might also be you might have more protections available than you are aware of. And you could also advocate at your state and local level for protections like those in jurisdictions that have enacted them. I can stop there in the interest of equity and time.
Great, thank you so much, Laura. We did have one question come in through the Q&A. It says, can you clarify more on a felony being considered a special accommodation, as that is unheard of here in Georgia?
So I should clarify, the felony itself wouldn't be considered the accommodation. You'd be asking for a request for accommodation based on the disability that was tied, that led to you down the path that led to your conviction. So for example, if someone had untreated substance use disorder, which we see a lot, which led them into a mental health crisis, you could even skip the mental health crisis and just have untreated substance use disorder, which then led them to becoming homeless, which then led them to engage in theft, say identity theft or property crime, or even person-to-person crimes. If that disability was untreated, you could tie it directly to that.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'm just gonna ask one more question for the sake of time. And I think Jacqueline might have answered it in the chat, but it was, housing after a felony is reasonable accommodation in and of itself or not? Must it be asking about disability additionally and needing at least a doctor's letter? Sorry, still not clear. This was from Linda.
No, having a felony itself is not a disability at this current state of affairs, but if you have a disability that led you to engage in criminal behavior that then resulted in your conviction, you can make that connection. And I'm happy to connect with anybody outside of the conversation too, if I can provide some more clarity around that.
Of course, and then we'll share the contact info with all of the participants afterwards too. So thank you. And somebody did note in the chat that having a felony is a disability as it disables you in a society that should be treated as such. Just a perspective. And I think framing that question that we should look at. But I would like to welcome our last speaker for the day. Before we go ahead and stop the recording for today, we do have Maria Moon, who is a housing justice organizer from the Chicago Fair Housing Alliance. Maria, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and then go ahead and give your presentation.
Hi, everyone. Again, as Sydney said, I'm Maria Moon. I'm in Chicago, Illinois. I'm with the Chicago Area Fair Housing Alliance. And I mean, it's just great to be here. I'm so happy to see all your faces doing this great work. But a little bit about Chicago Area Fair Housing Alliance. So, you know, we partner with advocacy organizations, government agencies, municipalities who are committed to the value of fair housing, diversity, and integration. CAFA works to combat housing discrimination and promote integrated communities of opportunity through education, advocacy, and collaborative action. One of our greatest accomplishments, me being a formerly incarcerated person myself, is our Just Housing Amendment, which we were able to get passed here in Cook County in 2019 of January the 1st. So the Just Housing Initiative has definitely given us a breakthrough, especially during this COVID experience, as far as people with records having a place to stay and not being homeless. So I can just tell you a little bit about it, just a few points for the sake of time. The Just Housing Amendment, it ensures that housing providers and housing authorities do not consider arrest, juvenile records, and sealed and expunged records when evaluating someone's application for rental housing. Protects tenants and homeowners from being denied housing based on convictions. Greater than 3 years old, though. I heard someone talking about the look back period. We really had to fight for that 3 years. They had wanted about 7 years. So that was a real fight for us here in Cook County. The Just Housing Amendment also requires housing providers to conduct an individualized assessment for applicants with convictions that are less than 3 years old, considering factors such as the nature of the offense and how much time has passed since it happened. And if anybody has any questions, I can definitely be willing to answer them. I can get some fact sheets also for later. Okay.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Maria. We didn't have any questions come in. I think there was one that came in terms of a template for creating their own eviction moratoriums in their cities. And I think Kim answered it, or is following up with the question, just asking if they're looking for legislative text or a declaration that tenants could use. But Linda in the chat did say, thank you, Maria, for fighting for that justice. And Kim Johnson also said, thank you for your work.
I have a question for Maria, but I've already asked this question to Maria, and I know that her answer is pretty impactful. Maria, when y'all were advocating for the Just Housing Amendment, what are some of the strategies that you used that you thought were effective to communicate the importance of it?
Well, thanks for that question. That's I love being asked that question because so the major thing was to mobilize the voices of people that were directly impacted. You know, they were so brave and courageous, you know, people that actually who were in those situations of homelessness or couch surfing, which is homelessness, domestic violence, you know. So for those individuals to get up in front of the Cook County commissions, or in front of news, cameras, that it was very courageous for them to publicly tell their stories, while in that situation. And I would say that was the major reason why this bill was passed. So I would just suggest the number one strategy is that people directly impacted are leading at that table and creating at that table, and those voices are uplifted. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Maria.
That's the first one. For the sake of time, I had to get that one out.
Oh, for sure. So there were a few that did come in within the last few minutes, but it was, what is being done to make sure that the just housing measure is being upheld? And this is from Chris.
Great question, Chris. Thank you. So one of the things, of course, you all know when it comes to policies, is after the passing of them is the implementation part of it, which is a whole nother deal. A lot of policies are not enforced, because of the lack of implementation. So it is important, to do education. We educate landlords, we educate homeowners, we educate potential tenants, we educate people that's coming out of jails and prison. From one day of coming out, to some people that have been out for 20 years who, have had trouble finding housing on their own. So I would say definitely just the education part, you know, like we, you know, CAFA, we do PowerPoint presentations. And I don't know if I said this, but it's not just CAFA. CAFA is a part of the coalition, the Just Housing Coalition. So there are other, I hope I said that, but there are other organizations, many organizations who did this work with us, and they are also an important part of implementing in their different organizations or various roles. But the community has to know what's going on. The community has to know that a new law passed, that, you know, that policies have changed. You know, I help my landlord all the time. Actually, she calls me whenever she wants to evict someone, you know, because we do the some eviction work. Well, we do like the housing choice voucher discrimination type of work, source of income work also. But I help my landlord. So before she even makes the move, she calls me like, Maria, what do you think I, you know, need to do when, you know, or, you know, is this breaking the law? Or, you know, and so like just that partnership with landlords as well, I would say. And I can say a lot more, but to keep it short.
Thank you. And then somebody else did ask a question for you, and it was, how could we start the work of advocating around this issue in Alabama? I have a friend that recently retired from HUD that would be willing to help with the politics of it and the lingo. And this is from Dina.
Wow, hi Dina from Alabama. Yes. Okay. So I would say, you know, how I look at it is like a triangle. That's me. You know, community first, which, you know, includes people that's directly impacted. And then, you know, definitely the policy people, you know, attorneys, and then other community organizations, organizers. And I would say, you know, just listening to, again, it's the same answer for me, really, just listening to the voice of those who are in the community, who are directly impacted, and, you know, that are doing this work, but as well as those who are not doing this work. Because sometimes us that's directly impacted, we may not be listening to the voice of people that's just coming out of prison. We may have been out of prison for 8 years, like myself, or 5 years, you know, but it's important that we listen to the people that just came home yesterday, right? Just came home last week. And, you know, so I would say that, make sure that as far as the writing of the policy, so I'm not a lawyer, but I know throughout the process, the writing was important. The way we wrote the policy, just every little details. Is it or, is it and? Is it so many small, you all know what I'm talking about. It's like so many details. The writing is just very important, the way it's written. And I would also say that you all know that this work is definitely not always the most peaceful work. So even within like the coalition, people may think differently, have different ideas, different strategies. So just knowing that that is a part of creating policy, changing policy. So it's not like you all are failing because people are not in agreement or people are bumping heads. It's just, that's a natural part of the process. You know, we all, as far as the Just Housing Coalition, we're so close, it's ridiculous. Like we're family and we disagreed on a lot. We had it out, but it was great.
Thank you so much, Maria. And thank you to everybody for staying. I know we said we would stop around 6:45, but I'll go ahead and stop it now so we can go ahead and allow our attendees to participate and share their stories and any questions that they might have in regards to the eviction moratorium ending. But I do want to take the time to thank our fabulous panelists for presenting today and joining us and answering all these questions. Feel free to stick around as well. And for those who will be watching this afterwards, we're going to be ending the recording here, but we will be sending up a follow-up email to everybody who attended with all the information that was shared. And our next Tenant Talk Live will be on September 13th instead of September 6th because of Labor Day. So we look forward to joining you then. Thanks, everybody.